Okay, Kenny Evans, come on up and share with us. One of the concerns that everybody has is they don't understand the two segments of this and which one you are involved in. Broadband.
Thank you. First, let me compliment Patty and say amen to what she's presented to you here. NAMI is, in fact, a great program. As she pointed out, it'd be great to have 1,000 members here. It'd be great to have the 2,500 who suffer some mental illness, probably me included, who ought to be participating in this and learning some of the techniques to help their neighbors, their family members, and others. Broadband. I made the mistake of attending a meeting with Greg Freestad about 5 years ago, and it's been downhill since then. Patty had a couple of metaphors and analogies, and I had one that happened today. It was, as many of you know, I'm the president of MHA Foundation. It's not Mogollon Health anymore, it's MHA Foundation. And arrived at the office today, you know, we've got those steps that come right up to the front door there, and Patty Beauchamp was struggling with this huge box, trying to get it in the door, and Sandy was on the other side trying to pull on it, and so I walked up and started trying to help them, and we're pushing and tugging, and I'm saying, well, you know, maybe we just take it out. No, we need it in its box, and so we're pushing and shoving, and I go back on the way back to the pickup. I pick up a little crowbar so I could put it underneath it and lift up, and thinking that would get it started through the door and into the room. And I said, okay, when I lift up on it, let's push it in. Suddenly there was this silence, and the next word from Sandra was, in. I thought we were trying to get it out. I've had that same sensation with broadband over the last 5 years. We started that discussion before we had any crises here in town, but those crises have come and have produced some pretty significant negative impacts here in the community, as many of you are aware. And I won't focus too much on those, other than just to say, as someone who's involved in the healthcare in our community, I've seen the catastrophic impacts that a cut in a fiber optic cable can have on our community. One of the 4 major cuts that we've had that have left this community stranded resulted in us, the community, ending up spending over $140,000 flying medical patients to the valley because they couldn't receive medical treatment here because your records now are not on paper. EMRs, the electronic medical records, are required for them to be able to treat you. And if they can't access the internet, they can't access those records, they can't treat you. And if it's something that's significant that can't be waited, on which you cannot wait, you're shipped to the valley for a $40,000 ride in a helicopter. One of many, many issues that surfaced. We had situations where you couldn't get gas, you couldn't get money out of your bank. We have become incredibly dependent on the technology that now runs not just businesses but our very homes. And so as we started on this journey, when I met Greg 4.5 years ago, when this journey started, he had already put, I don't know how many hours, but a lot of his life and time and hours into saying there is a way to get internet from Phoenix to Payson. I was a newbie. I knew what the impact of technology was. I knew what the impact was of not having that technology, and so I was most intrigued by all the maps that he had. He had power poles lined up. He knew how to get from here to there, so we thought, gee, this would be an easy pitch. So we tried to make the pitch to the operators of the cable that connects us to the world. That was owned by Century. Actually, it's not owned by CenturyLink, but which is managed for 99 years by CenturyLink. It wasn't even CenturyLink, I don't think, in those days, was it? Yeah, it was Maubelle. So, you know, it's been a long evolution. About 3 years ago, after the second major cut, it became apparent to the community in general that we needed a solution, and we needed to be working together to help find that solution. The county and the town of Payson came together, created a consortium that was supposed to work with 3 counties, Navajo, Apache, and Gila County, to find the solution because they were facing the same kind of crises in their communities. That consortium met and met and met and met. I don't remember the total number of times we met, but it was more than I can count on my crippled up old hands. And with experts, not just Greg, but other experts that had volunteered to serve on this group, in this group. We had the expertise to say, here are some alternatives that you, CenturyLink now, ought to be looking at. First of all, we had a horrible time even getting them to send somebody to the meeting other than Jeff Marisola, their public relations person for the West. We couldn't get their engineers to come. We couldn't get their engineers to even take phone calls from us. Finally, the consortium about 2 years ago said we need to come up with some alternative solutions. And so they literally put together a couple of options. One of them was Greg's plan to how you could get to the valley. Another one was a way to connect us to the northern trunk line, which basically follows I-40. We were excited. We had a plan. We had a way to make it happen. We presented that to CenturyLink, and 3 visits from 3 senior vice presidents later, you could measure our progress in a thimble. They basically said no, and when we offered to show them the engineering work that the consortium had done to say, here's the way to make this happen, their response was not even to give us access to their engineers to look at it. Is that correct, Greg?
Yeah.
So about 18 months ago, my board at MHA, and many of you have a deep debt of gratitude you need to pay to Cliff Potts. Many of you know Cliff. Cliff was the one who jumped up and said, there's nothing in this community that affects MHA's mission, by the way, is health and education. Not health care, not medicine, but health and education. And Cliff said, as best I can remember, there's nothing that's holding this community back that's more important than getting a solution to this broadband problem. And the following meeting, he had garnered enough support from other board members that they voted to have MHA take the lead on providing financing. Thrilled with that opportunity, I showed up at our consortium meeting where we had a vice president of CenturyLink going to be there and present to us. And after he babbled on for about 45 minutes or an hour, Greg asked him, you know, what would it cost? How much would it cost to get this program in motion? He spit out a number, and I raised my hand, and he said, we can't do it because communities don't support us financially. And so I raised my hand and said, give me a number, and I'll go get a checkbook, and we'll write you a check right now. And his response was, well, that's not all we have to do. You don't understand how complicated this is. And then we listened for another 30 minutes. We made our displeasure known to CenturyLink's leadership. And the next meeting, we had another vice president come who babbled on for a long time, long enough that a number of us were about to leave. Again, Greg said, we have a plan. I can show it to you. I can present it to your engineers. Can we have access to your engineers? Well, you don't understand all of our difficulties. You don't understand the politics that we have to deal with. We have to take care of our business and our shareholders. We pressed hard, could never get an answer. Then we meet, 2 meetings later, we meet at the sanitation district, and again have a third vice president come and press them for a number. Again, the same group saying, give us a number. Cliff Potts didn't yell, oh yeah, I did, kind of. He got pretty abusive and finally said, give us a number. Well, it would cost millions. And I again raised my hand and said, we'll write the check. To which they responded, you don't understand. This is a political system. It involves our customers. It involves a system across many states and shareholders that we're responsible to. So it became very apparent to all of us that there was not going to be a solution that involved CenturyLink. At that point, MHA's board voted to say, go find a solution. They directed me and provided a checkbook and said, go find a solution that will get a reliable broadband, ultra-high-speed broadband into Payson. We wrote that check October of last year, hand carried after analyzing 4, maybe 5 different proposals. We selected Cable One, we wrote the check, we hand carried it, delivered it to them last October. That was to close the loop between here and the North Lambda Rail, the northern trunk line that feeds eastern Arizona off of I-40. But that didn't solve our longer-term problem, which was to find a way to have true resilient internet. What's the difference between redundant and resilient?
Resilient works all the time, and redundant has another path that breaks.
Okay. If my electricity goes off, I could always go to Maryland next door and take an extension cord and plug it in and get my essential services working. That probably is a little bit redundant, but it's not resilient. Okay, resilient in terms of internet is a system that allows one part of that system to be cut, completely severed, and you don't even know it because it instantly changes in microseconds to a backup system. That's what resilience is, and that's what we've been working to accomplish here. To make that happen, we need to close this loop from here to Phoenix. Sound familiar? Should to Greg. He's been on this. What? Give me an estimate. How many years you've worked on this?
25.
25 years. We have in the community people who are saying, well, how come this just came up? A quarter century to some is, you know, probably really a very recent event. But for me, that's been a long time in coming. The questions that come in the community are, why should, if, and we've already paid for it, by the way, we will have redundant service in Payson as early as fall and no later than December 31st. Okay, so we will have an ultra high speed. Currently we're served by 72 strands of monofiber, which means it's either lit or it's dark. We will be served by 144 that have 8 colors on it. So the equivalent of 1,152 fibers versus 72 fibers. What does that mean in terms of bandwidth? That means everyone in this community could have 2 gigabit service to your home. Okay? Now, that solved part of the problem. It hasn't solved the rest of the problem, which is how do we get from here to Phoenix? It's a more complicated route. It's going to be a more expensive route. Negotiations are into hundreds of hours to come up with a plan that allows us to have this broadband trunk line coming to Payson. This is not, by the way, to help you have better television service. Okay? This is not designed to be something to allow your part of town to have the ability to run 16 TVs in 4K definition simultaneously. This is an effort on our part those who've been working on this consortium and those on MHA's board and Aspire Foundation's board, this is our effort to try to bring in a true resilient line that will ensure that you have internet service at the hospital, at your bank, at the grocery store, at your doctor's office. It's also an effort to bolster up our public safety issue. We provide police and fire and DPS with the best and most reliable form of interconnectivity so they can do their job in the best way possible. I've talked probably long enough. I had a list of 16 questions that people in the community have asked, but I'd rather answer your questions.
Brenda? Okay, here is Orville. There, just turn it on.
Okay, I have a question.
Come back over here a little bit.
Okay, no feedback. Okay, I don't completely understand what you just said about resilience as being a problem. My understanding is that the internet was developed by the Department of Defense to withstand an atomic bomb, and that routing should follow whatever path is programmed into the routers. Why do we need a link to Phoenix if we have a link to the internet? It's all one internet.
It is not. It is not. The internet is one structure, but you have to be connected to it. It's like saying the power grid. Everybody has power. You have power if you have a way to be connected to it. Okay, and there are really currently there are two technologies that allow you to connect into the backbone of an internet. The I/O Center in Phoenix, as an example, handles about 13 terabytes, 13 billion bits of information per second. You've got an internet node in north and west. So you've got to get to that trunk line to have the ability to communicate on this ubiquitous internet. You can get there with fiber, you can get there with copper, or you can get there with microwave. Okay, but you have to get to that. Best way to describe it, it's like having a system that's got a first mile, a middle mile, and a last mile. Okay, you have to have all three. First mile is the service provider. Okay, it's the Cable One, the Coxes of the world that provide content at the beginning. Second part is that middle mile. You've got to get it out of those data centers to the end user, and that's another business segment. At that point, you're over here, and you have the last mile. That's your own television provider. Okay, but if you cut a line, okay, if you're depending on fiber and that's your only access, you cut that line, you have no access to this ubiquitous internet.
I understand, but if we're connected to a trunk that parallels I-40, we are connected to the quote cloud, and it's just a matter of adjusting router tables that I thought somebody bigger than CenturyLink had control of, like the federal government.
No. And if you had as a classic example here, because it's in our lifetime, well, some of your lifetime go back a little longer than mine, we had a fire not very long ago, Colorado-Chevesky fire. Had this line been in place at that point in time, we would have been cut off from that internet. Okay, but if you had CenturyLink, which goes west and north and across Fossil Creek, through the bushes, the Squirrel Hills, and gets to Cottonwood eventually, and then Camp Verde, and then down to Phoenix. Had that been available, you could have switching that if it speaks the same language, will allow you to use that as a redundant backup. You could go that way instead of going east. The problem is those two are not, the operating systems of those two are not currently compatible.
I can't understand that because the internet protocol is an international standard and everybody's supposed to be able to talk over the same protocol.
No. Greg, you're an expert on this stuff. Is that correct?
I'm a software engineer.
Okay. The internet protocol works well once you get to the line, but you have to be able to connect to that
He
line.
mumbles, I can't understand a word of what he says.
He's saying that the internet protocol is standard around the world, whether you're in China or in Payson, Arizona. And that's true, but you still have to have the equipment that allows you to get onto that internet. We had a great presentation for those who took the time to come to it on Friday of last week, where Mr. Robinson, or Nick Robinson, showed up with the actual equipment, showing how this works and how there are multiple kinds of equipment that get you to that internet protocol.
Don was next.
Yeah, Kenny, did you know that APS and Sunworld Project have installed fiber optic cables on their transmission towers?
Probably at least 30 hours worth of meetings with both of them. The challenge is they're currently licensed for transmission of power. Their permits across Forest Service land, their permits across Native American lands are unique to their power structure. SRP is a federal organization. APS is a local one that has a monopoly for power. And the use, where they do have those lines, and they do have that internet provided, it's very limited in scope. We have had discussions with them about bringing a 576 fiber cable, shielded cable. It's got to be shielded from electricity that's in the power line, across the top of their high tension 500 kVA and 350 kVA lines up here. But again, they're at best, probably the permitting process for them will be will be measured in multiple years.
Okay, here's Al.
When this plan is complete, who is our service provider, and will there likely be a change in the cost of service?
Yes and yes and yes. Let me address that again, like I mentioned before. You've got a first mile provider. Those are the big guys who put the content on the internet. Okay, wherever they are, they put that content on the internet, and it's available wherever the internet connects. Then you have the middle mile, which is what we're talking about. That's the trunk line that gets to your community. Okay, boom. That trunk line will get you access to the internet, and all that's on the internet is, as he mentioned, once you're on that internet, you can go anywhere. Okay, but to get to that middle mile, you have a last mile provider, and those are very specific private businesses that make that juncture to the middle mile. In the town of Payson, you have CenturyLink and you have SuddenLink, who are providing providing hardline connections to the internet. So if you've got SuddenLink, that's a corporate business that connects you to the middle mile that connects to the internet.
And that won't change?
That won't change unless you and your provider choose to change it. Okay, now why would I say yes, yes, and yes? What's happening right now in the community? How many have seen the flyers around town for Phoenix Wireless? How many have seen the signs around town for Hospitality Wireless? Okay, the reason that we're cheering those on is what really in this country, we start out talking about patriotism and the Tea Party all the time. What really brings about true savings in cost to you?
Competition.
So if you have one service provider, how much competition do you have? If you have two, they tend to figure out ways of, like SuddenLink and CenturyLink have held us hostage for decades. If you have three, how about four? How about five? If you have 5 options, do you think the price is going to go up or go down? Okay, so the answer to your question is not because we do it, but because the system works the way capitalism is supposed to work. When we bring this trunk line in, and Hospitality, which is, by the way, I think going to be the first customer of Cable One's trunk line, or Phoenix Wireless, or CenturyLink, Suddenlink, Verizon, AT&T Connect, you have more options, and that competition will likely drive prices down.
I get a question. Okay. So, I had not, when I talked to you the other day, I had not read my roundup. I was several issues behind, so now I've caught up. So, I think what people are having a struggle with is that E-rate funding plus MHA funding is bringing, the E-rate is bringing a couple of strands from Sholo down here. No, okay, this is why everybody's confused. And then you're paying, or Cable One is then paying to add strands to whatever the minimum of E-rate is bringing in funding. Okay, so that gets that into Payson and connect to the thing. And I maybe misunderstanding. But in order to make it redundant, so that if it's cut here, we're out, if it's cut there, we're out, you want to take a line down to Phoenix.
No, that's for resilience.
For resiliency. Okay.
Redundance happens the minute we turn the line on in December. Because
Okay.
if this line out here is cut and Cable One, let's say,
There we go.
if Cable One's line is cut out there, you can still, if you contracted for it, you still can get service through CenturyLink's line, going north and east and west and south and ultimately ending up in Phoenix. That's redundancy, so you have a backup, and those who pay for that service will have a backup. It's resilience that we want, which means if that line gets cut, you never even know it.
Okay. Okay, I don't, then I have another.
Yeah, Kenny, please be aware there are two different thoughts here on what those two terms mean, okay?
Yeah.
As a fiber optic ring engineer, redundant is ring service that automatically switches. Resilient is good service that doesn't go out very often. So just keep in mind there are different thoughts and different minds here on what those two things mean. And what we're all striving for is basically ring service that'll not let you know it was cut. You stay in service. So just want to let you know there is some difference of thought on what those terms are.
All right, that helps.
Remember, we started this discussion talking about mental illness. So.
Right, okay. All right, well, hang on just a second, because I wasn't quite finished. So, the other point is, you have asked for money from the town of Payson, and hope to ask for money from the county, and the tribe, and some other folks, to put it into their budgets to go down to Phoenix. And so we're wondering if we already have then, that completes the loop. Is it the Phoenix that completes the loop? Or
Yes, it requires, Greg can speak to this, but without that loop down there, we're still a third world country. You know, it will be obviously my board wouldn't have spent millions of dollars if we didn't think it would be a super positive thing for the community of Payson to have this ultra high-speed internet coming into Payson and available to us. But it doesn't solve the redundance or resilience problem in terms of businesses, in terms of hospitals, in terms of critical services like public health and safety that we all have come to expect and to deserve, very frankly. Back to your second part of that question, well, if we don't do anything, won't they still build it? That's one of those questions that was on my list that pops up around town. The answer is no. The total build is $18+ million. Okay, and to try to sort out the discussion about E-rate, it would be, the trunk lines are critical in terms of that middle mile, getting from here to that internet connection, that hub or wherever it might be. The E-rate provides the spurs. It provides the connection from a trunk line to a school, from a trunk line to a library. It does not provide any money for that trunk line. Okay, I've spoken with Milan. Milan's given his number to half a dozen people, including the newspaper, to try to get the story straight. That was probably a mistake. But anyway, the issue of the E-rate is that's how it connects to there. But that E-rate is pretty minimal. It would be like having our fire service here in town depending on people's garden hoses. Okay? You need a fire hydrant. You need a fire hose. You don't need a garden hose. And that's the same here. Our libraries today will not be the same libraries of a decade from now, any more than our schools will be the same a decade from now than they are now. If somebody had said to me that our schools were going to need gigabit service to individual students, a decade ago, I'd have laughed at it. Okay? And yet today, 2 gigabits is the standard in the valley. So the capacity is one issue, and it's something we're dealing with this line. The problem is public health, safety, hospital, personal care are not solved by that line that we've paid for, and it will be here by December.
All right, good. Over there was.
Well, we appreciate people like yourself, Mr. Evans and Craig, background, and a lot of us don't know much about gigabytes and megabytes and all of this. And we're glad people like you know, but here's one of the things that we do know about. Sterner asked a question, Councilman Sterner asked a question, why is no residential people going to have access to this, and yet we're going to be the ones to pay for it? They want $1 million of this taxpayers' money, which seems like we just taxed the food. You know, we're starting to get a little money ahead, and everybody comes in. See the fire department or somebody trying to get their hand in the piggy bank. And so you have to come down to my level and the taxpayers' level and tell us what advantage is going to be to us for a service that we're not going to get, but we're going to have to ask to pay for.
You can get that service. It's just we can't force you or your supplier to do it. What kind of a Tea Party would say that we should be able to take the power away from you as an individual to select who your last mile provider is? You get to choose that. Okay? Now, will it benefit them? Absolutely. And will having multiple providers here in town benefit you? Absolutely. But it's your choice, not ours. It's not ours to dictate to them. Everybody's handout. Let's see, what we're asking from you is it is 5% of what has already been put up for this project. 5% to show. Why when we have grants from the federal government or grants from the state of Arizona, why do those always come as matching grants? Why do they require local participation to get that state grant or local participation to get that federal grant? Why? Doesn't make any difference to the feds. It doesn't really make any difference to the state budget. Why do they require local participation to get a state grant?
To show good faith, that we really, really want it.
in the game.
And we're in the game.
To show that we, people on the bottom line, really support this. What this proposal would do would cost you 50 cents a month. How much are you paying currently?
Yeah. Way much.
How much are you paying currently as a citizen of the town of Payson for broadband service, for cable service?
$50.
$80.
How much are you paying to the town of Payson to provide that?
Nothing.
No television.
No. How much are you just paying to the town of Payson?
Nothing.
Nothing? I beg to differ with you. We require a license fee.
All right.
We require a license fee. How many of you looked at your bills recently to see how many lines are on that bill?
Yeah.
The county has a piece of it, state has a piece of it, feds get a piece of it. Okay, those cable companies don't pay that. They pass it on to you in the form a little line item on your bill. How much of that comes from the town of Payson? Meaning you, Lynn.
We
You ever looked at it?
don't really look at our bills,
Yeah, I
do we?
look at it, but
Look at it. Look down there where it says
looks like
city,
more.
city license tax. It runs roughly $2.50 per month. What does the town do with that $250? That $2.50, I'm sorry.
I don't know.
Why do they require a license? Why do they charge you that licensing fee for Suddenlink? That currently generates $108,000 a year. With the House Bill 2229, we, the town, is either going to have to apply that to all providers of cable service or none. Okay, so they'll either have to extract that off of your bill because CenturyLink and Suddenlink decide they don't want to be licensed anymore by the town, or we've got to make it apply universally to everyone who provides this service. At that point, that'll be a $200,000 revenue stream to the town. Why did they provide that? What's the genesis of allowing a town to charge you for the licensing fee of a service provider? It was to ensure, from a public standpoint, that you have reliable, resilient service.
Kind of insurance, then.
It was to be their assurance that the company, the private company, is going to deliver the product that you're paying for. So you're already paying that tax. What we've asked for is that some of that money, which works out to be 0.022% in a 10-year on a current budget and 0.001% on a 20-year budget.
I think maybe I can answer that question in a little bit more down-home way. Once we get redundant, I'll call it ring service here, the Zach Fishers of the world probably won't die on the highway because their cell phones will keep working. What's the value of cell phone working in an emergency to the community? That's where that money is going to go. It'll also go towards making sure that everybody that comes through town can buy fuel and so forth, because we'll have ring service available. And that's why, if you set aside what Kenny just said, just right down to earth, some of that money is going to go to put that sort of capability into the town, so we're not killing people on the highway. I don't know if I can put a money figure on that, but I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Okay,
It helps,
so,
but it's a background that's in the past. The city has come to us with these things, and we tried to finance 500 Chinese families and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, got nowhere. And we built up a non-trust, and so we're gonna have to show it a little bit more, I believe.
May I suggest something else to you? One of the unique things about the proposal we've made is that we are agreeing to build this first and then ask for the payment. We're not asking you to come up with the money up front. Unlike Cliff and his colleagues around the boardroom in MHA, it isn't going to be a leap of faith. You're going to have a system in place when you start paying for it, not something where you're paying and hoping that it will come.
so the line item that's going to be discussed, or was discussed and put on hold until Thursday afternoon, is they want a line item, Tom, they want a line item in the budget placeholder for what? For an increase in that insurance licensing fee, or what is it?
No, they will just pull money out. They're already receiving the
They're
money.
already
They've been
receiving the money.
receiving the money. Over the last decade, they've received more than $1.25 million from you,
Okay,
to assure that broadband and cable service is provided in a reliable way. We're asking that they just pull $90,000 a year out of the budget over 10 years. In exchange for that, not only do the citizens get the benefits that Greg talked about, but we've negotiated with Cable One that they will provide the town of Payson with a 2 gigabit connection for 20 years at no cost. Not at a cost of this amount or this amount, but for 20 years, they will have free internet service up to 2 gigabit per second at their identified facilities. 20 years.
The other thing that we're not
Need a
talking
microphone?
about. Can I?
Yeah.
Do I need a mic? Can you hear me?
No. Here, do you want to
The
run it over
other
to
thing,
him? Okay, we're going to go a little over this evening. That's okay, because this is important that we know about this.
the other thing that we're not talking about is it will be a draw for industry, light industry. It will make
Absolutely.
the town a lot more appealing in that sense. It's very difficult to understand. I have to cry stupid on this thing because it took a very long time for me to understand exactly what it is that we're about to do. So I'm couching it as a good thing for our town because of what it's going to do for our town overall. And you know, I understand. I mean, believe me, I understand the angst that a lot of people have, but a lot of it's based on really not understanding the entire process.
Absolutely.
You know, but ultimately, to me, it's a good thing for Payson because it's going to do a lot of good things.
Yeah. Orville?
I think I understand that Payson is currently getting $2.50 per household in tax revenue that they are not actually spending on supporting internet services, and they're being asked to actually take the money that is already being collected for internet services and use it to provide internet services.
A little piece of it.
A little piece of it. Yeah.
So it is a hit on the budget, but it's just like our federal highway funds are diverted for other kinds of projects. Asking for the money to go where it's supposed to go is a good thing, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, thank you. So I think that we have gotten a good lesson in broadband this evening, and now understanding a lot more than we did ahead of time.